The first time I heard the word unstable attached to my name, it didn't come from a doctor, it came from a whisper. I was standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store when Mrs. Calder from down the street leaned in close, her cart squeaking, her eyes soft with pity. She touched my arm like I might shatter. "Are you doing okay these days?" she asked too carefully. "If you ever need help, help with what," I wanted to say. Choosing between bran flakes and oatmeal, I laughed because laughing felt easier than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired, I suppose." But she didn't smile back. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they've already decided something about you. When I turned away, I felt it then, that small, cold click inside my chest, like a door locking from the outside. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking enough that I spilled coffee grounds across the counter. I stared at the mess and thought, "You're not unstable. You're just confused." And confusion, I told myself, was allowed. I had lived in that house for 34 years. Same porch swing, same creak in the third stair, same view from the kitchen window where the maple tree lined just enough to catch the afternoon light. Stability had been my language, routine my comfort. I raised my son there, patched scraped knees, ironed school shirts, learned the sound of his footsteps well enough to know his mood before he opened the door. So when people began treating me like I was fragile glass, it didn't make sense. It felt like a rumor with legs, running ahead of me into rooms I hadn't entered yet. Before all this, my life was ordinary in the best way. Mornings with weak coffee and the radio murmuring the weather. Afternoons volunteering at the library twice a week, shelving books with spines worn smooth by other hands. Sundays meant roast chicken if my joints allowed it, or soup if they didn't. I talked to my son Joshua every other day, sometimes more. Short calls mostly, he was busy. New marriage, new job, new life. His wife Rachel came into our lives like a breeze, polite, quiet, always smiling but never staying long. She had a way of nodding instead of answering, of listening without revealing much. I told myself she was shy, or thoughtful, or simply different from me. At first I admired her composure. She was neat where I was cluttered, calm where I was expressive. She didn't linger in the kitchen or ask for seconds. She cleaned up without being asked. She kissed Joshua's cheek lightly like affection was something to be rationed. "Isn't she lovely?" Joshua asked me once, watching her from across the room. "She is," I said, and I meant it. I wanted to mean it. The shift was so small at first I didn't recognize it as a shift, just little gaps, missed calls, short replies, Joshua canceling visits with apologies that felt rehearsed. Rachel answering his phone more often, her voice smooth and careful. "He's resting," she'd say. "Work's been stressful." I believed her, why wouldn't I? Then the calls from friends slowed. Invitations stopped coming. At church, people hugged me longer than usual, like they were bracing themselves. Conversations paused when I walked up, then restarted with forced cheer. I began to feel like a shadow moving through familiar rooms. One afternoon, my sister Ellen called. We talked about nothing for a while, the weather, her roses, a recipe she'd ruined. Then she cleared her throat. "Joshua's been worried," she said gently. "Oh," I asked. "About what?" There was a pause long enough for my stomach to drop. "Well," she said, "Rachel mentioned you've been having a hard time emotionally." Emotionally, such a soft word, like a pillow placed over your face. "I'm fine," I said too quickly. "I've always been fine." "I know," Ellen replied. I told her that, but she said you've been confused lately, forgetful, upset over small things. I stared at the wall, at the picture of Joshua at age 7 holding a fish almost bigger than his arm. I remembered how steady my hands were that day. "I don't forget," I said, "and I'm allowed to be upset." "I know, honey," Ellen said. "I just thought you should know what's being said." After we hung up, I sat very still. The house ticked and breathed around me. The clock on the microwave blinked 12:00 because I'd never bothered to set it. The afternoon light had shifted, leaving the room dimmer, quieter. I tried to retrace my steps. Had I cried too much at the wedding, asked too many questions? Spoken out of turn, I replayed conversations like old tapes, searching for the moment where I'd tipped from concerned mother to mentally unstable. Nothing stood out. Nothing that deserved a label so heavy it bent people away from me. That night I called Joshua. It rang until voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The next morning I texted him a simple question, "Are you okay?" He replied hours later, "Busy today, talk soon." Soon became a word without shape. I began to notice how Rachel's name appeared in conversations that weren't mine. How she spoke for me without ever speaking to me. How concern, when repeated often enough, began to sound like diagnosis. What hurt most wasn't the distance, it was the quiet authority with which my life was being rewritten. Someone else was telling my story and people were listening. I didn't yet know why or how far it would go. But standing alone in my kitchen, wiping coffee grounds into my palm, I felt the first clear thought settle in my mind like a stone. If I stayed silent, this version of me would become the truth. In silence, I was beginning to understand was exactly what Rachel wanted. After that day in the grocery store, I became more aware of myself than I had ever been before. Not in a healthy way, not with clarity, but with the kind of awareness that makes you second-guess your own footsteps. I started paying attention to how often I repeated things, how long it took me to remember a name, whether I'd already told a story before. I caught myself stopping mid-sentence, afraid of sounding scattered, afraid of confirming something I hadn't even agreed was true. That was the quiet cruelty of it. The story about me was working even on me. I still woke up at the same hour. Still drank my coffee from the chipped blue mug Joshua gave me in college. Still folded laundry the same way I always had. But I felt like I was being watched, measured against some invisible standard I hadn't been told about. When Joshua did call, his voice felt cautious. "How are you feeling today?" he asked one evening. "Feeling?" I repeated, smiling though he couldn't see it. "I'm fine." "Why?" There was a pause, just a breath too long. "Rachel mentioned you sounded tired the other day." I pictured her saying it, calmly, reasonably, as if she were doing him a favor. "I was tired," I said. "I'd been gardening all morning." "Makes sense," he replied, but his voice didn't relax. Little moments like that began stacking up. Joshua checking in more often, but not like before, not with warmth, with concern. Like a doctor monitoring symptoms. Rachel started calling too, always polite, always brief. "I just wanted to see how you were doing," she'd say. "I heard you sounded a bit upset last time we spoke." I'd search my memory. "Upset about what?" "Oh, nothing specific," she'd reply lightly. "I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." It was impossible to argue with concern shaped like kindness. When I suggested we all have dinner together, Rachel hesitated. "Joshua's under a lot of pressure right now," she said. "We're trying to keep things calm." Calm. Another gentle word, another invisible wall. At church, the looks changed. People asked me if I was resting enough, if I thought about talking to someone. One woman pressed a pamphlet into my hand about coping with emotional transitions. Transitions into what? I wondered. Madness. I laughed it off each time, made jokes, downplayed it. But alone, I started doubting myself in ways I never had before. One afternoon, I misplaced my keys. Found them in the freezer exactly where I'd left them after putting groceries away. "See?" a voice whispered in my head. Maybe they're right. That frightened me more than anything Rachel had said. I called Joshua that evening. He answered, but Rachel was already on speaker. "We're both here," she said brightly. "I just wanted to talk to my son," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. There was a pause. "Of course," Joshua said, but he didn't take me off speaker. I talked about the weather, about the roses, about nothing important. Rachel listened quietly. At one point I paused, searching for a word just a second too long. "You see," Rachel said softly. "That's what I mean." My heart thudded. "See what?" She laughed gently. "Nothing, nothing, I just worry. Worry, always worry." After we hung up, I sat in silence, my hands clenched in my lap. That moment, small, almost forgettable, was the first time I felt something else beneath the confusion. Anger. But it was tangled with shame. Because what if she was right? What if I was changing and couldn't see it? The next week, I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. I ran into Rachel's cousin at the pharmacy. She smiled too widely. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Holding up from what?" I replied. She blinked. "Oh, Rachel said you've been struggling since the wedding, that you've had trouble adjusting." Adjusting to what? Love, marriage. Losing control? I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I went home and cried in the shower where the water could cover the sound. That night I wrote everything down. Dates, conversations, what was said, what wasn't. I needed proof for myself more than anyone. Patterns emerged quickly. Every story Rachel told about me sounded reasonable, concerned, protective, but each one chipped away at my credibility. She forgets things. She gets overwhelmed. She doesn't mean to, but she misremembers. It was gaslighting wrapped in sympathy. The worst part was how Joshua responded, not with anger. Not with doubt, but with trust. He trusted his wife. One afternoon, he showed up at my door unannounced. That alone told me something was wrong. We thought we'd check on you, he said, standing slightly behind Rachel. We, not I. I'm fine, I said again, the words tasting thinner each time. Rachel looked around the house. Her eyes lingered on stacks of books, half-folded laundry, a mug left in the sink. Maybe we should talk about support, she said gently. Support for what? I asked. Joshua shifted. Just in case. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about my well-being at all. This was about control. If I was unstable, my voice didn't matter, my memories didn't matter, my objections could be dismissed as confusion, and Rachel knew it. As they left, she hugged me lightly, whispered, "We just want what's best for you." I watched them drive away, my reflection staring back at me from the dark window. For the first time, I understood the danger I was in, not physical, but something quieter and more permanent. They were erasing me while I was still standing, and if I didn't act soon, even Joshua would forget who I really was. After Joshua and Rachel left that afternoon, the house felt different. Not empty, observed, as if the walls themselves had listened and were now waiting to report back. I stood in the living room for a long time, my hand still resting on the back of the chair Rachel had sat in. It was warm from her body. That detail bothered me more than it should have. It felt like proof she'd been there, assessing, cataloging. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked unevenly with each turn. I'd meant to fix it months ago, or had I? The thought snagged, twisted. Did I forget? That question followed me everywhere after that. Into the kitchen. Into the shower. Into the quiet moments when there was nothing to distract me from it. I began keeping lists, not because I needed them, but because I needed evidence. Evidence that my mind still worked the way it always had. Groceries, appointments, calls. Every small task written down and checked off with care. When I completed something, I felt a flicker of triumph that quickly curdled into sadness. Why do I feel like I have to prove this? Rachel called more often after that visit, always at polite hours. Always with a gentle tone. I just wanted to remind you about your library shift tomorrow, she said once. I know, I replied. I've been volunteering there for years. Oh, of course, she said quickly. I just know how easy it is to forget things when you're under stress. Stress, another word added to the pile. At the library, my coworkers watched me closely, too closely. When I paused to think, someone rushed in to help. When I shelved a book in the wrong place, they corrected me with soft voices. Take your time, they said. There's no rush. I'd never rushed before, but now I felt like every movement was being measured. One afternoon, my supervisor asked me to sit down. We've noticed you seem a bit distracted lately, she said. Maybe it would be good to take a break. A break from what? I asked. She hesitated. From everything. I nodded and thanked her because arguing would only prove their point. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. They were steady. I called Joshua that evening. Rachel answered. He's in the shower, she said. Can I take a message? I'd rather speak to him, I replied. There was a pause. I imagined her covering the phone, whispering something. He's been worried about you, she said instead. We both have. Why? I asked. Because you seem confused lately. The word hit me harder this time. I am not confused, I said, my voice shaking despite myself. There was a softness in her response that felt rehearsed. See, this is what I mean, you get upset so quickly. After we hung up, I slid down the kitchen cabinet until I was sitting on the floor. I pressed my forehead against my knees and breathed until the shaking stopped. This wasn't about care anymore. It was about framing. Rachel never accused me outright. She let others do it. Friends. Family, coworkers, even Joshua. The brilliance of it was terrifying. I began replaying old memories, testing them. Did Joshua really love pot roast? Did I really plant the roses the year my husband died? Or had I remembered that wrong too? I pulled out photo albums, letters, cards. Tangible proof of my life. My handwriting was the same. My memories matched the evidence. Still, doubt lingered. One evening, Ellen came over. She hugged me tightly. I'm worried, she said. Because Rachel told you to be, I replied before I could stop myself. Ellen stiffened. She's just concerned. About what? I asked. Name one thing I've done that proves I'm unstable. Ellen couldn't. She looked down at her hands. She just says you get emotional, she murmured. I've always been emotional, I said. That's not illness, that's personality. Ellen nodded, but uncertainty clouded her eyes. After she left, I cried, not because I felt weak, but because I felt invisible. The next turning point came quietly. I found a notebook in my desk drawer, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were pages of Rachel's handwriting. notes she'd left during visits, lists she'd written in my house. She'd been writing here. On the last page was a list. Remind Joshua, she repeats herself. Mention confusion after calls. Frame concern, not accusation. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. This wasn't worry, this was strategy. I sat there, the notebook shaking in my hands as the truth settled in. Rachel wasn't afraid of me losing my mind. She was afraid of me keeping it. Because as long as I was clear-headed, I was a threat to the story she was telling, to the control she was tightening around my son. And now that I knew, I understood something else too. This wasn't over, it was just beginning. I didn't sleep that night. The notebook lay on my kitchen table, open to that last page like it was breathing. I read the list over and over again, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less deliberate, something accidental. But they didn't. Remind Joshua, she repeats herself. Mention confusion after calls. Frame concern, not accusation. Each line was calm, clinical, as if I were a project, as if my life were something to manage. By morning, my eyes burned and my head ached, but my thoughts were clearer than they'd been in weeks. For the first time since all of this began, I wasn't wondering if I was unstable. I was wondering how long she'd been planning this. I made coffee and didn't spill a single grain. I toasted bread without burning it. I moved through my house with purpose, every step firm, every thought sharp. If Rachel wanted to paint me as confused, I would not give her the satisfaction. I called Joshua at 9 in the morning. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. Joshua, I said calmly, I need to talk to you, alone today. An hour later, Rachel called back. Joshua's at work, she said. Is everything okay? Yes, I replied. But this conversation is between me and my son. There was a pause longer than usual. I'll let him know, she said. By late afternoon, Joshua texted, can we come by tonight? The word sat heavy on my chest. I typed back, I want to speak to you alone. Several minutes passed, then okay, he arrived just after 7. Rachel stayed in the car. I watched her through the window, sitting straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed forward. She looked calm, confident. Joshua stepped inside and glanced around as if seeing my home for the first time. You look tired, he said. I'm fine, I replied. Sit down. He did. I placed the notebook on the table between us. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. I found this, I said. He frowned. What is it? Something Rachel left here. He opened it, his brow furrowed as he read. Halfway down the page, his face changed, not dramatically, but enough. A tightening around the mouth, a stiffness in his shoulders. What is this? He asked. You tell me, I said. He shook his head slowly. This doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, I replied. She's been building a story about me, for you, for everyone. That's not... He stopped himself, took a breath. She's just been worried about you. I leaned forward. Joshua, look at me. Have I ever been forgetful, confused, unable to manage my life? He hesitated. And that hesitation hurt more than any accusation. I don't know, he said quietly. Lately, you've seemed upset. I've been isolated, I replied. There's a difference. He looked down at the notebook again. Maybe she was just writing things down so she wouldn't forget. Don't, I said. My voice didn't rise, but it hardened. Don't do that. Silence filled the room. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second stretching thin. She's been telling people I'm mentally unstable, I said. Friends, family, church members. She's been doing it in a way that sounds kind, but it's not. Joshua rubbed his temples. She said you were struggling. Struggling with what? I asked. Name one thing. He couldn't. A knock sounded at the door. Rachel had come inside. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said softly, stepping into the room like she belonged there. But I felt uneasy sitting alone. Her eyes flicked to the notebook, just for a second, but I saw it. The calculation. What's this about? She asked. I didn't answer her. I looked at my son. Tell her what you just read, I said. Joshua held the notebook up. Why did you write this? Rachel's expression shifted only slightly. Surprise first, then concern, then sadness. I was trying to help, she said. I didn't think she'd see it. That sentence landed hard. You didn't think I'd see it, I repeated. She sighed as if exhausted. I've been worried about you for a long time. You forget conversations, you get emotional, you imagine things. Like this? I asked, gesturing to the notebook. Yes, she said gently. Like this? Joshua looked between us, torn. Rachel, she's misinterpreting it, Rachel continued. That's what I've been saying. She takes things personally. I stood up, my knees were steady, my voice was steady. You told people I was unstable, I said. You did it quietly, strategically. You made me doubt myself. I was protecting Joshua, she replied, from stress. By erasing his mother, I asked. Rachel's face tightened. You've always been dramatic, that was it. The mask slipped just enough. Joshua looked at her, really looked. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Did you tell people she was unstable? He asked. Rachel hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. I was concerned, she said finally. People talk. Joshua stood up abruptly. You said you were helping her. I was helping us, she snapped, then caught herself, softened her tone. I didn't think it would upset her this much. Upset her as if my life were a misunderstanding. I want you to leave, I said. Rachel looked at me shocked. Excuse me. This is my home, I said, and I want you to leave. Joshua hesitated, then he turned to her. Rachel, go to the car. She stared at him, disbelief flashing across her face. Then she walked out without another word. The door closed. Joshua sank back into his chair, his hands trembled. I didn't know, he whispered. I reached across the table and took his hand. I know. For the first time in months I felt seen, but I also knew this wasn't the end. Because when someone's control is threatened, they don't let go quietly. After Joshua left that night, the house went quiet in a way that felt earned. Not the hollow quiet I'd been living in for weeks, but the kind that comes after a storm passes and leaves the air sharp and clean. I washed the mugs we hadn't finished using. I wiped the table where the notebook had lain between us like a loaded weapon. I moved slowly, deliberately, grounding myself in each motion. I wanted my body to remember this feeling, clarity without panic. I slept that night, not deeply but enough. In the morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped explaining myself. For weeks, no, months, I had been answering questions I never should have had to answer, proving things that didn't need proving, smiling through concern that felt like a leash. I realized then that every time I defended myself, I was stepping onto Rachel's stage and playing my assigned role. So instead, I chose something else. I chose the truth. I started with Ellen. I invited her over for tea, just the two of us. When she arrived, she hugged me carefully, the way people hug someone they think might break. I didn't sit down right away. I handed her a folder. What's this? She asked. Read it, I said. Inside were dates, notes, quotes, copies of messages Rachel had sent me, a written account of the notebook. I didn't editorialize, I didn't accuse, I simply laid out the pattern. Ellen read in silence. When she finished, her eyes were wet. Oh my God, she whispered. I thought I was helping. I know, I said, that's why it worked. She reached for my hand. This time there was no hesitation, no doubt. I'm so sorry, she said. Next was the library. I met with my supervisor and brought the same folder. I spoke calmly, clearly. I didn't cry. I've been the subject of a false narrative, I told her, and it's affected my work and reputation. She listened, asked questions, took notes. 2 days later, I was invited back. No break suggested. No careful watching, just normalcy. At church, I stopped shrinking. When someone asked if I was doing better, I answered honestly. I'm doing well, I said. There was a misunderstanding that's been cleared up. I didn't elaborate unless asked. And when people did ask, I didn't whisper, I didn't dramatize. I told the truth plainly. Something interesting happened then. People began telling me things. She warned me about you, one woman admitted quietly. She said you were fragile, another confessed. She told me not to take things you said seriously. Each confession hurt, but each one also stitched something back together. Rachel had underestimated one thing. People respect calm truth more than whispered concern. Joshua called every day that week, sometimes twice. I don't know how I missed it, he said once. She was always so reasonable. That's how it works, I replied. The lie doesn't look like a lie. He told me they were arguing, that Rachel was angry, not loud but cold. She accused him of choosing me over her. I'm not choosing sides, he said. I'm choosing reality. I was proud of him for that, but I also knew how hard it was. Rachel didn't confront me again, not directly. Instead, she sent messages that dripped with wounded innocence. I never meant to hurt you. I was only trying to help. I hope one day you understand. I didn't respond, because understanding wasn't required for accountability. The turning point came at a family gathering, a birthday dinner for Joshua's uncle. Rachel arrived late, composed as ever. She smiled, hugged. Played her role perfectly, but this time people were watching her. At one point she pulled Joshua aside and whispered something. I saw his shoulders stiffen. Later his cousin approached me. She just told me you've been confused lately, she said quietly. I didn't believe her, I nodded. Thank you for telling me. That was the moment the narrative broke. Rachel had kept telling the same story, not realizing it had expired, that people now heard it differently, that what once sounded like concern now sounded rehearsed. She left early that night. Joshua stayed. I think I need space, he said softly. From her. I didn't celebrate, I didn't advise, I simply said take care of yourself. Because this wasn't about winning, it was about being whole again. That night, alone in my kitchen, I made coffee and didn't spill a thing. I didn't check a list, I didn't question my memory. For the first time in a long while, I trusted myself again. In that trust, that quiet, unshakable thing felt like the strongest ground I'd stood on in months. Once the truth stopped living only in my kitchen and started moving through other people's mouths, everything changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the steady way rivers change landscapes quietly, permanently. I began noticing it in the smallest moments. A neighbor who had stopped waving months ago smiled and crossed the street to greet me. A church friend asked my opinion again instead of offering advice. At the library, someone laughed when I told a story instead of watching me with careful concern. I hadn't realized how much I missed being treated like myself. Rachel, on the other hand, noticed immediately. She tried to regain control the only way she knew how, by tightening her grip on Joshua. She told him people were turning against her, that I was manipulating the situation. That my episodes were convincing because I'd always been dramatic, but something had shifted in him. You said you were worried about her, he told me later, but you never asked her how she felt, you just spoke for her. That was the heart of it. Concern that doesn't include listening is not concern at all. The real public moment came unexpectedly at church. Rachel approached the women's group leader after service, speaking softly but urgently. I watched from across the room as heads leaned in, expressions serious. My stomach tightened, old instincts flared. Then the leader walked toward me. We'd like to talk, she said. I followed her into a small office. Rachel was already there, sitting straight-backed, hands folded. She looked relieved to see me, as if I'd arrived right on cue. She's been worried about your emotional health, the leader began. I took a breath, slowly. I understand, I said. May I respond? Rachel's eyes flicked to me, warning. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry, I spoke clearly. I've been the subject of repeated claims about my mental stability, I said. None of which have been discussed with me directly, I've documented them. I handed over the same folder, the leader read. Rachel's composure cracked. That's private, Rachel said sharply. So was my reputation, I replied. The leader looked up. Why wasn't this brought to us earlier? Rachel hesitated. The room felt very still. I was trying to protect my husband, Rachel said finally. The leader nodded slowly. But at what cost? That question hung in the air. Word spread quickly after that, not gossip, clarification. People began connecting dots they hadn't realized were dots at all. She said the same thing to me. I thought it was strange she never let her speak for herself. I noticed how often she corrected her in front of others. Rachel stopped attending church shortly after. At home, Joshua reached a breaking point. She says you turned everyone against her, he told me one night, voice heavy, that you planned this. I didn't plan anything, I said. I stopped lying. He was quiet for a long time. I think she's been doing this to others too, he said finally. That realization hurt him more than what she'd done to me. Rachel didn't apologize. Instead, she withdrew, packed a bag, stayed with a friend, left notes full of sadness and blame. I never meant to be the villain. I was only trying to help, but help doesn't erase someone. As weeks passed, people stopped tiptoeing around me. Conversations returned to normal. Invitations came back. The air felt lighter. Rachel's absence was noticed, but not mourned in the way she might have expected. Control doesn't inspire loyalty. One afternoon, Joshua sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place where the notebook had first been opened. I'm seeing a counselor, he said. They called it emotional manipulation. I nodded. It has many names. He looked at me with something like grief. I'm sorry I doubted you. You didn't, I replied. You were confused, that's different. He smiled weakly. As for Rachel, her story no longer traveled well. Without my silence to support it, it sounded hollow, excessive, cruel. People began asking her questions she couldn't answer. And that was the consequence she never planned for. When you build control on whispers, it collapses the moment someone speaks clearly. After the noise settled, what surprised me most was the quiet. Not the empty kind that presses in on you, but a softer quiet, one that leaves room for your own thoughts again. For weeks, my mind had been crowded with other people's voices. Concerned voices, doubting voices, voices that asked questions instead of listening to answers. Now they were gone. I noticed the change in my body before my mind caught up. My shoulders didn't sit so high, my jaw unclenched. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I also stopped rehearsing. For months, every conversation had come with a script in my head: what I'd say if someone questioned me, how I'd explain myself if they looked uncertain, how I'd soften my words so I didn't sound too emotional. One morning, I realized I'd answered a question without editing myself first. It felt like breathing after being underwater. Joshua came by more often. Sometimes he talked. Sometimes he just sat with me while we folded laundry or drank coffee, the way we used to before everything became careful. I didn't realize how much I was letting her speak for me, he said one afternoon. For both of us. That happens slowly, I replied. No one hands you a leash, they just shorten it. He nodded, eyes downcast. Rachel stayed away. I heard bits and pieces through others. How she was angry, how she felt misunderstood, how she told people she'd been unfairly judged. I didn't respond. I had learned something important by then. Closure doesn't come from being understood by the person who hurt you. It comes from understanding yourself again. I returned to the library fully. No watchful eyes, no careful tones, just books and the soft shuffle of pages. One of the children asked me to read aloud, and I did, my voice steady, warm, confident. At church, I laughed without checking who heard me. I shared opinions again. I disagreed politely without fear of being labeled difficult. No one flinched. At home, I took down the lists I'd taped to the refrigerator. I put the notebook back in the drawer, not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder. Not everyone who speaks softly means well. One evening, Ellen called. You sound lighter, she said. I feel lighter, I replied. There was a pause. I'm ashamed I believed it. I'm not, I said. That's how it works. The lie borrows credibility from love. She exhaled, relieved. Joshua and Rachel eventually separated, not dramatically, not publicly, quietly. The way some things end when they can no longer be controlled. He told me one night, voice breaking, I didn't know who I was anymore. I reached for his hand the way I had when he was small. Now you do. The strangest part was this: I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm. I didn't want Rachel punished. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. And it did. I started doing things just because I wanted to, took longer walks, planted new flowers where the roses had thinned. Learned to cook a dish Joshua never liked. I was no longer living as someone's version of me. I was living as myself again, and that, I realized, was the quiet victory no one could take away. There is a particular kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the loud, dramatic kind you see in movies, but the softer one, the kind that settles in your bones and makes you wonder if speaking is worth the risk. For a long time I lived in that silence. I told myself it was peace. I told myself I was being mature. I told myself it was better not to stir things up, better not to make people uncomfortable. But silence, I learned, is not the same thing as peace. Silence is where other people decide who you are. When Rachel began telling her version of my story, I didn't stop her. Not because I agreed, but because I assumed the truth would be obvious. I believed that people who loved me would see through it. I believed my years of consistency, kindness, and clarity would protect me. I was wrong. Truth does not defend itself. It waits patiently and sometimes too long. What saved me wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge, it wasn't even confrontation. It was the moment I stopped asking for permission to exist as myself. I stopped whispering. I stopped explaining my emotions as flaws. I stopped apologizing for being human. The moment I spoke clearly, calmly, without begging to be believed, the story changed. Not because I argued louder, but because I finally refused to play the role I'd been given. People often ask me now, how did you know she was doing it on purpose? The answer is simple. Concern that isolates you is not concern. Help that silences you is not help. Love that erases you is not love. If you are being spoken about instead of spoken to, pay attention. If you feel smaller every time someone claims to be protecting you, trust that feeling. Gaslighting doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like a hand on your arm and a voice full of sympathy. I don't hate Rachel. I don't wish her harm. I understand now that control often comes from fear, the fear of losing influence, of being seen clearly, of standing without leverage. But understanding someone does not require sacrificing yourself. Today my life is quieter again, not the frightened quiet of before, but a steady one. The kind where you hear your own thoughts and trust them. Joshua and I talk openly now. He asks questions instead of assuming. He listens without filtering my words through someone else's lens. And I have learned something I wish I had known sooner: your voice does not need permission. If someone is trying to convince the world you are unstable while insisting they are the only one who understands you, pause. Step back, speak clearly. You are allowed to be emotional without being broken. You are allowed to remember differently without being wrong. You are allowed to take up space without apologizing. So I'll leave you with this question, one I had to ask myself too late, but you don't have to. If someone told everyone you were unstable, but never said it to your face, would you stay silent or would you speak? If this story touched something in you, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you've lived through something similar, know this: your truth is still yours and it is enough.